Do you believe in the paranormal? If you do, what's the creepiest/weirdest experience you've had with ghosts? So I worked for a security company that provided security for state offices, structures, parks, and buildings. One place was an abandoned state mental hospital. It was spread over 23 acres and had about 20 or so buildings. Our job was to make sure that the doors remained locked. We patrolled the site 24/7 365. If anybody else was found on the property, we'd have to detain them, wait for police, and they'd go to court on the next available day. The place was built starting in 1863 and abandoned in 2003. The original building still stands and there were some modern buildings as well. The place was creepy AF, especially at night. There was no power, so it's just pitch black at night. The only thing you could see was whatever is in front of your headlights. Well, among other creepy things that happened here, this one is bizarre. There were children at this facility over the years, so random playground equipment scattered. I saw this swing going from where I started filming and didn't stop for a good 3 to 4 minutes after. It happened multiple times, on different swings throughout my time there. My family told me I had done this, and for years I thought I had just dreamed it up. When I was 4, my favorite great-uncle died. I loved him and he treated me like a grandchild. We used to sit in this chair that was a recliner but spun in a circle like a computer chair. He would let me whip it around until I got sick and would sit me in it and tell me stories. I loved his stories. He dies of cancer and the funeral and viewing was on my birthday. My mom told me that I didn't fully understand what was happening as I keep asking things like why is uncle sleeping? And when will he wake up? I was also a bit of a brat in asking for my presents. Afterward we had gone back to my great-aunt's house, his wife, for my cake and presents to cheer up the mood. I immediately went looking for him and was reminded that he wasn't coming back, so I just sat in his chair spinning myself while all the adults were in the kitchen consoling my great-aunt. I remember this part clearly, but I always thought it was a dream. Uncle walked out of his room. From the chair you could look right down the hall of their one-story house where there were 2 rooms and a bathroom. Uncle walked right out and I smiled and was about to call to him when he placed a finger to his mouth to tell me to be quiet and smiled at me. I looked around the corner, into the kitchen, looked back at me, and with a smile walked back into his room. I chased after him, but when I got to his bedroom it was empty. I walked back into the kitchen, telling everyone I saw Uncle and asking where he went. They explained again that he had died. Years later, after my aunt and uncle bought the house in an auction when my great-aunt went to a nursing home, weird things started happening in the house. I told them about my dream when they mentioned it at a family function, and my mother told me that it wasn't a dream and had actually come into the kitchen to tell them I had seen Uncle. My sister and I couldn't sleep and decided to go to Denny's one night at like 1 a.m. We took the outer road to get there and home. On the way home the radio turned to static out of nowhere, and then on the left side of the road up ahead I could make out something white and human-shaped. As we got closer, it was clearly a ghost-like figure of a woman walking. I turned to my sister and she was white as a sheet, and I said very quietly, "Did you see that?" And she said, "The ghost woman walking?" And then the radio turned back on. And I got panic tears in my eyes because it was so just fucking weird. Anyway, I was 23 and she was 21, and that night she made me sleep in her room like we were children again, lol. For sure, one time me and my older brother were going sledding and we drove to a nearby hill. We parked and I exclaimed, "Look, the moon is spinning." He obviously didn't believe me at first, but then he saw it too, and we were both just shocked. It was a bright winter day, but up in space it appeared as if the moon was spinning on its axis while moving forward in the sky. It passed the sun quickly before disappearing behind the clouds. No eclipses were scheduled for that day. I still think about it from time to time. This is an old post of mine, but thought it was worth telling. Yes, I believe in ghosts. I've had enough experiences in my life to fill a book. First, here's a bit of background. I'm from Texas, and my husband is from Maine. We both live in Texas now, but during the summer we attempt to escape the heat and visit his family in Maine for a few weeks. I had my fair share of experiences growing up in a haunted house, so I was raised as a believer. Weird things seem to happen frequently, but I don't like to automatically attribute it to a ghost or whatever. I like to think that I'm a fairly logical person, and like to try to debunk weird stuff. That being said, my husband is pretty skeptical and doesn't spook easily. So that makes this story even more interesting. Around 11 p.m. one night during one of our Maine trips, he and I were sitting on my father-in-law's front porch and were just chit-chatting. The porch is raised and looks down over a backyard that runs to the tree line at the edge of thick woods. We were just hanging out, sober I might add, when we heard what sounded like an adolescent boy singing scales. La 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 la. It was just background noise, and honestly we were so used to living in an apartment in the city back home, so we didn't really think anything of it. In fact, we were annoyed. My husband actually said, "Do you think he knows we are here? That could be awkward." I laughed, and then I realized what we were listening to. We were hearing what sounded like a boy, in the woods, late at night, walking back and forth in the dark woods, singing scales over and over, in pitch black. My husband was still bent on the idea that he should give the guy some warning that he had an audience, so he sang a tune of scales back to him. La 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 la. La came the response from the trees. It sounded like whoever it was, traveled from deep within the woods to instantly stand right at the tree line beside us. It was loud and it sounded as if whoever, or whatever, it was, had instantly covered a huge amount of space to go from somewhere in the woods to just a few feet away from us. We both instantly had the fight or flight response and, without even thinking, we both jumped up as if we were going to run into the house. Something about it felt weird, and we had flipped a switch from harmless, awkward fun, to terrified. "There's a house back there, right?" I asked my husband. "There has to be," he said back. We were spooked, and went in the house anyway. We both couldn't stop thinking about it, and suddenly the details began to sink in about how weird it actually was. First, if that was an actual person, we would have heard them stomping around in the woods. It sounded as if they were pacing back and forth over an area of about 20 feet, and the woods were thick. You couldn't walk through them without cracking leaves and twigs. Second, there were no lights through the trees. If that was actually a 12 or 13-year-old boy, unless he had night vision, he would have needed a flashlight to accompany him, especially if he was taking careful steps as to not make a sound. If there was a flashlight, we would have seen it through the dark. Third, how did he instantly cover that much space to get right beside us at the tree line? I know that voices can be carried on the wind, but there was no wind that night. It also sounded enough like a real person, not a floating voice on the wind, that we both automatically assumed there was actually a boy out there. Lastly, we asked my father-in-law just where his neighbors lived in those woods. He just looked at us and said, "I don't have neighbors. There's no house back there for miles." People in Maine don't tend to have close neighbors, but the next day we went back and checked anyway. There was no sign of people anywhere. Edit, stupid mobile. In 3rd grade I swear I saw a ghost floating in the woods outside my house. It was a monk with his head bowed, hands folded in prayer. He was transparent but you could definitely see his form. It didn't feel threatening or negative at all, but it was still incredibly unsettling. I don't claim that it wasn't a hallucination, but I distinctly remember immediately freezing up with the fear of having seen something incredibly uncanny and running to my parents. We're a religious family, so we prayed that the soul would move on, and I never saw it again. For about a few years after, I was afraid to stare out the window to the woods for more than a second. The ghost in my childhood home was known to us. We even knew her name, as she was a recent ghost and people on our street remembered her. She was benign and even had a sense of humor, it seemed. One time she opened and then slammed shut my bedroom door at 1 o'clock in the morning just as I was in the middle of Ghost Story by Peter Straub and Stephen King. Scared the piss out me, but I could almost hear her laughing. It was almost like we were playmates. She was the younger sister of the kid before me who was almost my age. She only got mad once, and that was when I moved out of my parents' house and got engaged. I came back to spend the night for the first time since moving, and she let me know she was angry, but still did not really hurt anything. I do not yet I have experienced inexplicable things. We still have my late grandparents' house and stay there periodically on vacation. I was there for a week just after my parents had been there. The second night I was there, I was woken up by the faint sound of a radio in the distance. I could make out that a woman was speaking but couldn't decipher the words. There was faint classical music in the background. I thought my parents maybe set up a clock radio to go off at a certain time to mess with me, but couldn't find one. Could not be a neighbor, as the nearest neighbor is half a mile away. The following year our vacations overlapped. My parents were asleep in the bedroom I had used the year prior. I was in the living room. It was very late and I was reading silently. My father stomps out of the bedroom to tell me to turn off the radio as it kept waking them up. I had not turned on the radio. I asked him what it sounded like and he said a woman talking softly with faint classical music. We agreed it was weird. No one has ever heard it again, and this was 5 years since my parents and I were there together, and I've been back and slept in that same bedroom every year since. Not me, my husband. During his junior year, his grandma died. She had some cows on a ranch a few miles down from their house, and it was still not decided what was going to come of them. So one evening my husband and his oldest brother went out to the ranch to feed the cows. Now it was no secret that this ranch had many spirits on it. In fact, in a back corner there's a legitimate Indian burial ground, the only reason this ranch is still a ranch and hasn't been turned into another cookie-cutter neighborhood. Many times my husband and his brothers and sometimes their grandma would camp out there and experience many supernatural things, but this specific evening was the last time my husband would go out there. After they fed the cows, he and his brother stood by their truck, parked on the side of the road, talking until it got dark. Then for some reason they both stopped talking. It got way too quiet. No birds, no bugs, no cars, not a sound. Husband stared off into the trees in the ranch, then he looked up. As he did, a huge dark shadow flew over the tops of the trees. Then he looked straight up again, and standing just in view were men and women all dressed in 1890s attire. Every time he blinked more figures would appear. Husband's brother simply said, "Husband, get in the truck." Now, husband doesn't even remember getting in the truck and peeling out. He just remembers finally feeling safe and pulling off the road again to collect himself. He and his brother sat there quietly. "Husband? Yeah? What did you see back there?" "Well, I mean, what did you see back there?" They went into it a little bit more that I've never spoke of it again. Disclaimer. I've posted this before. I have several. These all happened at the same house, which was a 100-year-old farmhouse that was also a part of the Underground Railroad. We no longer live there. The house isn't there anymore. It's a very expensive neighborhood. 1. My parents said that they were sitting on our couch and watching TV. The fireplace shutter opened and closed several times on their own. 2. My mom was sitting in the same living room. Towards her front was a large wooden deck that had a fireplace in the center and 2 large windows on either side. To the right was a concrete porch that ran the length of that side of the house. It had a door off to the side and had several large windows on it as well. To her back was a bedroom that us kids shared in the winter because it was easier to heat half the house. To her left was the blue room. The whole thing was blue, but it was just a central room where our computer happened to be and had access to the basement. Anyways, on the wooden deck, my mom saw a black figure that was as tall as a bear, but too thin to be human. She said that she looked at it and had a feeling that it was watching her. It wasn't completely dark outside, but it was on its way. The figure then started doing laps around the house. It would pass the windows in front of her every few seconds. This was a 2,500-ish square foot farmhouse. It was incredibly fast. 3. We had a small family farm. Chickens, goats, pigs, quail, turkey, ducks, etc., and nothing big. We had about 30 chickens at the time. Living that far out in the country, we always set up traps by the coop to catch opossums and raccoons. Anything that ate chickens. Well, we go outside one day to see piles of feathers throughout the yard around the coop. Every single pile had a head on top of it. 30-ish piles. And that many heads. No puddles of blood. No insides anywhere. Just piles of feathers and heads. 4. Shortly after this, my dad, sometimes myself as well, would go out at night with a shotgun to see if we could find anything. We had gotten more chickens and had nothing unusual in the traps. Just cages. My dad was a manly man. Wasn't scared of anything. I've seen him move a tree by himself out of the road that 4 grown men weren't able to get together. He's tough, to say the least. So, he goes out like he usually does. Our chicken coop sits about 50-ish feet in front of our garage. It was really just a 1,000 square foot ranch out building. We just called it the garage. So, we hear 5 blasts or so from the shotgun, and very shortly after, my dad comes through the front door with tears running down his face. He is visibly shaking. After he calms down a bit, he explains that while in front of the garage, he heard a real guttural growl coming from the tree line right behind and above the garage. He said it wasn't like anything he had ever heard in his life. He was an avid hunter growing up. He's heard and probably eaten just about any animal that Indiana has to offer. He said it was low and demonic. He said he could just feel that it was evil. He immediately unloaded the shotgun and ran to the house. 5. I don't like to talk about this one much, but it's relevant. I would hear voices in that house. One night, I woke up my parents crying to let them know that the devil wanted my soul and wouldn't stop trying to get me to give it to him. I don't remember much about it because this was about 5th grade. I'm 31 now. I've since been diagnosed with general anxiety disorder. I could see where it might have just been my anxiety, but I definitely remember sitting on the living room floor, sobbing at like 3 a.m., just begging for the voices to stop. I haven't had anything else at all similar to this ever happen. 6. My parents found a tunnel in our basement that we assumed was a part of the Underground Railroad. My cousin was over at the time and asked if he could explore it. It was covered up, about shoulder height to an adult, and an adult could crawl through with not a whole lot of extra room. He had a flashlight and was gone for about a half hour. We were starting to get very worried when we could see the light again. He came back and said that there had not been an end in sight, but her was getting nervous having crawled so far. He was probably 16-ish. 7. We always had dogs and we would find our dogs in front of our house just dead. No wounds, prior symptoms. Just dead. Sometimes 3 at a time. 8. My dad, on the way home from work, saw a pile of dead dogs in a field by our house. Probably about 5 feet tall. A ton of freaking dogs. 9. My 2 brothers and I were in the house and things started to fall off the walls. We ran outside into the field in front of our house and looked across the street to the other cornfield. There were hundreds of deer just running. It filled the field for several minutes. Enough disruption caused by them running to make it look like a small earthquake. 10. We found out, after we moved, that there was a practicing coven that met not far from our house. We heard that a lot of dead animal remains had been found. 11. A decent amount of years later, I went with my sister to Chicago. Her fiancé had graduated boot camp and was going to a school. I'm not a military guy, so I'm sorry if I word any of this incorrectly. I'm just ignorant to it all. They do a ceremony thing for family with their group flags and such. They hang out for a bit and then leave for a school. On the way home, I was asleep in the car and my sister had gotten lost. I shot up out of sleeping and told my sister to pull over the car. She did and I told her to turn. She asked what's wrong and I said that I woke up because we were by our old house. I could feel it. She made a turn and we passed the front gates of a cemetery that was right by the house. Had she kept in that direction, she would have passed right by it. 12. What was at the start of all of this, was a dream that my sister had. I think we had some dogs die before this point, but we didn't find out about the coven until several years after we moved. I didn't find out about the dream until I was probably in high school. Anyways, surrounding the end of the property, there was a tree line that separated where the coven met and our house. My sister said that, in her dream, there were monsters tearing down the tree line and that she knew if they tore it down that, they were coming for me. Like, me. Not my sister or any of the other 5 people in my family. Haha, me specifically. Well, not long after, in preparation of turning the property into a subdivision, they tore down the tree line. All of this stuff happened. My parents decided one day that we were moving, we rented, and we had a house purchased, on contract, and were completely moved out in 2 weeks' time. I know this is a very long post. This is everything that I can remember at the moment. I tried to be very detailed because I am 100% aware of how unbelievable all of this is. The address of the house was 18401 SR 238, Fortville, Indiana. I don't remember the zip code. The house is no longer there and it is now a subdivision to houses that are $750K plus houses. They didn't end up tearing it down until we had been out for about 4 to 5 years. That's just a guess, but it kept getting delayed for some reason. I can answer any questions or clarify anything if anyone cares.
Thanks for watching. Please do like, share, comment and subscribe for more videos.